The photograph was taken in 1949, but it kept aging. Each year, the paper darkened a little more, the image deepened, and the man inside it, who had been dead for decades, began to move. It was found in Ambato, Ecuador, in the aftermath of the earthquake. A family digging through the wreckage of their house discovered it wedged between two stones. A single photograph, undamaged, dry, untouched by dust or ash. In it, a man stood by the window of a wooden room, half in shadow, half in light. He faced the camera, but his eyes were slightly turned, as though distracted by something behind whoever had taken the picture. At first, no one recognized him. They hung the photograph on a wall in the temporary shelter, among the few possessions that had survived. The next night, when the candles went out, the image began to whisper. Not loud, not like wind, just breath, shallow, rhythmic, forming syllables too faint to understand. The family thought it was stress, exhaustion, the mind confusing the flicker of the flame for motion. But the following morning, the photograph had changed. The man's head was now slightly tilted toward the camera. His mouth, once closed, was parting, as though mid-sentence. They burned candles around it for the next 3 nights, thinking it might stop. It didn't. Every evening, when darkness filled the cracks of the shelter, the photograph would murmur again. At first, a soft hum. Then, clearer. By the 4th night, the youngest child began repeating the words in his sleep. He said the voice called a name, one none of them knew. Esteban. They took the photograph to the priest. He refused to touch it. He said the eyes in it were too awake. When he left the room, the whispering followed him down the hall, faint but distinct, coming not from the air but from the glass of the frame itself. By dawn, the priest was gone. He left only a note beneath the photograph. It said, "If it speaks, do not answer. Would you? Would you stay silent if a dead man called you by name? If the air itself trembled like breath pressed between words not meant to be spoken?" By the 2nd week, the photograph had grown heavier. The glass in its frame fogged from within, and droplets of moisture collected along the edges. Not condensation, but sweat, faintly metallic, leaving thin trails down the wood. When they lifted it, the paper inside was warm. No one could explain it. No one wanted to. At night, the whispering became a rhythm, not constant, but cyclical, like breath being measured, practiced, perfected. The family began to sleep farther from the wall, but the sound carried. It vibrated through the floorboards, through water and glasses, through the thin ribs of the house. Sometimes it said nothing at all. Sometimes it repeated the same phrase over and over in a tone that wasn't quite human, as if language were being rehearsed through the throat of memory. Esteban. Pause. Esteban. Mira. The eldest daughter began to hear other words, not spoken, but thought inside her hearing. She said the voice wasn't outside anymore. It was behind her reflection. They covered every mirror in the house, but the glass of the photograph reflected still. On the 8th night, the youngest woke crying. He said there was a man standing in the hallway, half seen, lit only by moonlight. The same man from the picture, his skin pale as the photograph's border, his mouth moving silently. The father went to look. The hallway was empty, but the candle flame on the table flickered in 3 perfect beats. Short, short, long, and the photograph whispered again, this time not from the wall, but from behind the father's left ear. The sound was breath, but the breath carried weight. It moved the air, bending the smoke of the candle toward it. He turned. There was nothing. Except now, the man in the photograph was facing him directly. It wasn't dramatic. No blur, no distortion. Just a shift so precise it felt natural, inevitable. His eyes were no longer glancing aside. They were fixed, steady, alive. The next morning, when sunlight hit the frame, the image shimmered slightly, like film developing again, as though light had not yet finished creating him. The priest never returned. Instead, 2 men from Quito arrived. Archivists sent by the diocese to collect relics and documents lost in the earthquake. When they saw the photograph, they hesitated. One of them, a man named Morales, noticed the faint humming coming from inside the frame. He pressed his ear to the glass. For a moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, he smiled. A slow, vacant smile. "He's not whispering," Morales said. "He's listening." They took the photograph with them that evening, sealed it inside a wooden box, and boarded the night train north. They never arrived. 2 days later, the box was found beside the tracks, unopened. No bodies, no footprints. Only a faint layer of silver dust clinging to the hinges. The same residue that coats old photographic plates when the image inside begins to decay. When they opened it, the photograph was gone. In its place lay a single piece of glass, perfectly clear except for one small imperfection. A breath mark. A fogged oval, like someone had pressed their lips to it and exhaled once. Inside that faint oval, if you looked closely, you could see a shadow, not on the surface, but within the glass itself. A face, waiting. The photograph returned 6 days later. It appeared at dawn, lying face down on the wooden table inside the abandoned rectory where Morales had once worked. There were no signs of intrusion, no broken locks, no disturbed dust. Only a faint trail of condensation leading from the door to the table, each droplet perfectly circular, as if placed by hand. When the caretaker lifted the image, it was cold, colder than glass should be in the Andean morning. He turned it over and dropped it immediately. The man inside was no longer standing by the window. He was sitting now, one hand resting on a table, his other hand out of frame. And where his reflection should have been, the window pane behind him, there was now only darkness. Not photographic shadow, depth. A depth that the eye could not settle on. A darkness that looked back. When the caretaker told the diocese, they sealed the rectory. But within a week, others began reporting it. The same photograph, or one like it, appearing in different towns. Always the same face. Always the same faint whisper when light touched the glass. In Cuenca, a bookseller said it spoke to him in dreams. In Riobamba, a teacher swore the man blinked whenever she crossed the room. And in Ambato, where it had first been found, a child brought home a torn photograph he'd found in the rubble of an old chapel. The same man, half of his face missing, the remaining half smiling faintly, as if aware of being incomplete. The diocese denied everything. But late one night, the archivist who had catalogued the original case, a man named Leon, locked himself in the records room and refused to come out. When they forced the door open the next morning, the room was filled with the smell of developer fluid and wet paper. On the wall, illuminated by a single flickering bulb, dozens of photographs hung side by side, all of the same man, captured in different poses, as if aging one frame at a time, some smiling, some looking directly at the camera. One with his mouth open, mid-breath. Leon was nowhere to be found. But on the floor, near the drying trays, they found a puddle of clear liquid, and at its center, a single bubble, perfectly still, as if air itself had been caught mid-exhale. When they examined the prints, they discovered something stranger. The faces weren't fixed. Under magnification, the silver particles were shifting, moving minutely, rearranging themselves like living tissue trying to remember the shape of what it once was. And in the dark room, when the lights were off, the prince whispered softly. The sound was like wind at first, then breath, then voice. They spoke the same two words, again and again, each time clearer than before. Estoy, aquí, I am here. The technicians left the room untouched for weeks. But the whispering continued, seeping through the walls, spreading through the building like damp. Quiet, steady, patient. Eventually, someone covered the door with canvas and paint. The records were lost, misplaced, forgotten, but the negatives survived. Hidden in a sealed envelope, they made their way into private collections, sold and traded like curiosities from a haunted archive. Those who owned them swore they could hear faint knocking inside the box when the moon was full. One collector, an American anthropologist studying Andean folk rituals, decided to project one of the negatives onto a wall using an old lantern slide. When the image appeared, the room filled with the smell of ozone. The light flickered once, twice, then steadied, and the projected face began to move, not fluidly, not humanly, like a sequence of stillness remembering how to breathe. The man in the photograph blinked, the lips parted slightly, and then, very softly, the voice came, not from the speaker, not from the air, but from the wall itself. "Puedes oírme? Can you hear me?" The anthropologist didn't answer. He reached for the power switch, but the lantern went dark before he touched it. When the room fell silent, he could still see the afterimage on the wall, the faint, phosphorescent outline of the man's face, smiling, alive. After the projection, the anthropologist didn't speak for 3 days. His neighbors in Quito said they could hear him moving around at night, murmuring to someone. Sometimes they heard 2 voices, sometimes only one, his but layered, as though an echo answered from inside his throat. When the police entered the house on the 4th day, the projector was still running. Its bulb had burned out, but the wall glowed faintly, a square of pale silver shimmering as if wet. On the table beside it lay dozens of photographs, developed hastily, each one showing the same face as before, but closer, clearer, as if the man were stepping forward between frames. In the final photograph, the face filled the frame entirely. The eyes were open, dark, and impossibly detailed. When the investigators examined them under light, they realized the silver emulsion was fresh, still drying, and beneath the chemical smell, there was another scent: salt, breath. The anthropologist's notebook contained only one line, written in trembling handwriting. "He's learning to see through me." No one could find his body. Only his camera remained, loaded with undeveloped film. When the negatives were processed, there were no photographs, only blank frames except for the last one. That single frame contained a shadow, faint, human, viewed from behind, as if someone were standing just beyond the lens, looking back through the camera. The technicians refused to print it. They burned the film, locked the room, and sealed the archive. But something in the light stayed behind. For days afterward, anyone who walked into that room could hear a faint hiss, like air escaping a throat. If they stood very still, it became whispering, and if they listened long enough, they heard their own names spoken softly in the dark. Across Ecuador, others began reporting it. Old photographs in family albums, especially those taken before the earthquake, started to change. Faces turned slightly, hands shifted position. In some, the background deepened until it looked like a tunnel of shadow, and behind that shadow, faint outlines, almost human. People began covering mirrors again. Some buried their albums in salt. Others burned them in the hills, saying the images were looking for air. In Riobamba, a photography studio closed overnight after all its portraits fogged simultaneously. The owner swore he saw something moving under the glass plates. Not reflections, but mouths forming behind the silver. Everywhere, the same name returned. Esteban, whispered through static, through glass, through the hum of old film reels. A sound caught between breathing and remembering. By winter, the phenomenon had spread to other countries. Letters arrived from Colombia, Peru, Chile, all describing the same thing. Photographs that whispered when touched. Glass that fogged without breath. Images that seemed to know they were being seen. At first, people thought it was hysteria, but then came the negatives. In December, a roll of film was discovered in a ruined church in Cuenca. The images, when developed, showed empty rooms. No people, no furniture, except for faint shapes reflected in the window glass. When enlarged, those shapes revealed faces, hundreds of them, overlapping, as if every photograph ever taken in that place had bled into one. The last image on the roll was different. It showed the altar, and behind it, hanging where no wall existed, a framed photograph. The same one. But now, the man inside was no longer sitting. He was standing again, and in his hand, he held another photograph, a smaller one. The surface of that smaller photo was blank, but beneath the right angle of light, you could see the faint outline of another face forming. When the technicians inverted the tones, the face became visible. It was the anthropologist. His mouth was open, and the sound of the darkroom equipment, the whir of reels, the drip of water, the crackle of film, shifted subtly, aligning into rhythm. A whisper emerged, too low to be language, but steady enough to be breath. Then the lights flickered once, and for the briefest instant, every camera in the building clicked at once, spontaneously, without touch. All their lenses pointed toward the same corner. There was nothing there, only the shadow of a figure walking out of the frame. By early 1950, the photograph no longer needed to be seen to exist. It had become vibration. Cities reported unexplained distortions in sound, voices appearing in silence, faint murmurs rising from telephone lines, static whispering in patterns. Everywhere, the same cadence repeated. 3 breaths, 1 pause, then a single word. Esteban. Radio engineers in Guayaquil recorded one such instance. At exactly 2:14 a.m., during a government broadcast, the signal fractured. The voice of the announcer dissolved into white noise. Through that noise, a second voice formed, slower, deliberate, thick with air. It spoke not into the microphone, but through it. And on the recording tape, the peaks of sound drew the outline of a face, an unmistakable face. The technicians played the tape backward, forward, slowed it down, analyzed it frame by frame. The waveform itself resembled a human silhouette, the same as the man from the photograph. The sound was no longer communication. It was manifestation. The Vatican requested the reels. But when they arrived in Rome, the metal canisters were empty, lined inside with a thin film of silver dust that clung to everything it touched. When examined under magnification, the particles arranged themselves into microscopic grids, forming fragments of text in Latin. Lux memoriae respirat. Light of memory breathes. Meanwhile, in Ecuador, the old dark rooms began to fail. Photographic plates refused to hold images. The chemicals separated, their surfaces forming faint ripples like breath under glass. The air inside those rooms grew heavy, not warm, but aware. Technicians described feeling watched. The smell of developer fluid grew sharper, sweeter, metallic. One evening in Ambato, a photographer named Inés Carrera locked herself inside her studio to test a new roll of film. When she developed it, she found no image of her subject, only the interior of her own studio, empty, silent, except for a shadow near the far wall, shaped like a person standing where no one had been. She tried again. Each new photograph came back darker, denser, the shadow moving slightly closer to the lens. She destroyed the negatives, burned the prints, closed the shutters. But as she turned to leave, she caught her reflection in the darkroom glass. And in that reflection, she saw 2 faces, her own and his, the man from the photograph. He stood directly behind her, expression calm, mouth open, as if exhaling against the glass between them. She screamed, but no sound came. Her throat burned cold. Neighbors found her the next morning, unconscious beside the enlarger, her skin covered in fine silver powder. She survived, but her voice never returned. When doctors examined her, they found no damage to her vocal cords, only a thin layer of metallic residue lining her throat, as if she had inhaled the photograph itself. They called it mercury poisoning. She called it breath that wasn't hers. Soon, others began to change. Collectors, photographers, archivists, anyone who handled images printed before 1950, began reporting the same symptoms. Metallic taste, irregular breathing, occasional whispering from inside their chest. Doctors found nothing, but X-rays revealed faint anomalies inside their lungs, shapes resembling faces, impressions caught in layers of tissue, like film exposed too long to light. The phenomenon spread. In Bogota, students projected old photographs on classroom walls only to find the images subtly shifting each time the projector blinked. In Lima, a newspaper print developed a reflection of someone not in the frame, a man standing just behind the journalist who took the shot. The editors noticed his eyes followed the reader, regardless of angle. By midsummer, the sound could be heard without machines. People walking past old studios, galleries, or even mirrors reported faint humming. Not melody, not words, just vibration, like breath filtered through memory. And the vibration had temperature. Cold at first, then warmer, like someone standing very close, exhaling against your neck. Reports flooded in from all over South America. Unmarked photographs appearing in drawers, letters arriving with no sender, each containing a single glossy image. A man, faintly visible in the background, half in shadow. His posture changed with each photograph. Always closer, always clearer. In one image from Quito, his hand rested on the edge of the frame, as if holding the photograph from inside. When viewed under certain light, the surface shimmered faintly, a thin mist forming along the glass, shaped exactly like the outline of human lips. technicians tested it for moisture. It wasn't water. It was emulsion, newly formed, as if the photograph had developed itself again. Every reproduction carried the same anomaly. Every print, the same whisper when held near the ear. And those who listened long enough heard their own breathing synchronize with it. In, out, until it was impossible to tell whose breath was whose. The world didn't panic. Not yet. The images didn't harm. They only remembered. But one night, in Guaranda, the bells of the cathedral began to ring without wind or hand. Their echoes carried through the valley, vibrating windows, mirrors, and photographs alike. Every image in town fogged at once. When they cleared, the faces of the living had vanished. And in their place, him, everywhere, every wall, every window pane, every photograph filled with the same calm face, looking directly at whoever dared to look back. For the first time, the voice spoke not through air, but through light itself. It said one word only, remember, then silence. The bells stopped. The images cleared, but when the people looked at each other again, their reflections were a half-second late to follow. As though light, at last, had learned how to breathe. By 1952, the whisper had a name. They called it El Eco de Plata, the Silver Echo. It began as rumor, became anomaly, then entered the vocabulary of scientists who could no longer deny it. The phenomenon had spread beyond Ecuador. Laboratories in Buenos Aires, Santiago, Bogotá, all reported identical distortions in film emulsion. Images stored in sealed vaults were re-exposing themselves, changing subtly each time they were viewed. A smile shifted. An eye opened. A background deepened, showing details no lens could have captured. Every altered photograph emitted the same frequency when scanned with oscillographs. 19.2 hertz. A low subsonic vibration, inaudible to human ears, but capable of shaking glass and bone. The priests said it was the breath of souls trapped between light and matter. The physicists called it a feedback resonance of human observation. Both were correct, in their own way. The church sent emissaries to investigate. One of them, Father Luis Aranda, carried an early tape recorder to document the sounds. His notes described the voice as unattached to space. He wrote, "When I hear it, it is not before me. It is between the beats of my heart." He did not return from his final expedition. Only the recorder was found, lying on the steps of the church in Loja. The reel inside was still turning, though the tape had ended hours before. And from its empty spool came a faint hiss. A breathless, ceaseless loop, the sound of something remembering how to exist. The recording was played once in Quito, in front of clergy and technicians. When the reel began, the lights dimmed slightly, though no power dropped. Static filled the speakers. Then, a whisper, deep and wet, as if pressed between glass. It said, "No soy imagen. I am not image." The tape snapped before the sentence could finish. No one spoke for several minutes. The lights flickered twice. Then the reel began to spin again on its own. It wound backward. When it reached the beginning, the hiss grew louder, the air colder, and from the speakers, faint but distinct, came the sound of a shutter clicking. After that day, the church sealed the recording. Father Aranda's name was never mentioned again. But the idea spread that what lived within the photographs was not ghost or curse, but memory itself, realizing it no longer needed flesh to survive. By the late 1950s, the phenomenon became measurable. Film exposed under certain wavelengths developed on its own, without chemicals. The images that appeared were always human, but never those present in the room. Faces of strangers, faces from old portraits. Sometimes, faces without eyes. The world adapted. Museums stopped displaying pre-war photography. Archives were sealed in glass and stored in salt. Newspapers printed without images on holy days to prevent what they called reappearances. But the more humanity tried to contain it, the more it found new mediums. Radiostatic, television screens, X-rays. Every surface that caught light began to behave like film, absorbing impressions, holding breath, and sometimes whispering it back. Governments classified it as a transsensory interference pattern, but those who lived through it called it by another name, la respiración del mundo, the world's breathing. People stopped fearing it. They began to feel comfort in the sound. Mothers claimed that when their children died, the next storm brought their voices through the rain, soft, blurred, repeating lullabies that no one else could hear. Old photographers swore that if you left a piece of undeveloped film on your windowsill during a full moon, it would reveal who still remembered you. By 1960, almost every household in Ecuador kept at least one photograph covered in linen. Not to hide it, to let it rest. Because light, they said, never forgot. It only waited to be seen again. That same year, a physicist from Buenos Aires published a paper claiming the hum, el eco de plata, was a biological frequency, a form of environmental memory encoded in electromagnetic fields. He concluded with one line no scientist could explain away. When sound becomes image, time forgets direction. Months later, his lab burned down. The negatives recovered from the wreckage were unscathed. Each one showed the same photograph, the same man, standing by a window, half in light, half in shadow. But now, beside him, a faint silhouette, a second figure, smaller, standing at the threshold. In its blurred outline, you could almost see the shape of a camera. By the 1970s, no one remembered a world without whispers in the glass. Children were born into it. The soft vibration inside mirrors, the faint hum when opening a photo album, the breath-like distortion on old screens just before they flickered to life. To them, it wasn't haunting. It was weather. The phenomenon, once feared as el eco de plata, was now a constant, so natural that people stopped naming it. It was in the way sunlight pulsed when crossing a lens, in the subtle rhythm that echoed in the spaces between camera shutters and heartbeat. The man from the photograph, el hombre que miraba atrás, became a symbol. Paintings, songs, and even prayers carried his image, a calm face caught between expression and silence. He was no longer seen as ghost or omen, but as the listener, a reminder that memory never truly ends, it only changes its medium. Across South America, new art movements emerged. Fotografia viva, living photography, where images were left undeveloped intentionally, allowed to breathe. Artists claimed that after weeks or months, faint outlines would appear, not of what the camera had seen, but of whoever had stood closest when the shutter clicked. In some, you could even see emotion, sadness like mist, joy like faint ripples in the grain. Critics called it romanticism. Historians called it resurrection. Governments tried again to measure it. Sensors placed near old photographs detected rhythmic pulses that matched human respiration, but delayed by exactly 0.7 seconds. As if every image still inhaled what once stood before it, only slower. In Ecuador, elders began telling stories about the photograph that whispered back. They said Esteban, the man in the first image, had been neither priest nor photographer, but a listener, chosen by the light to remember what the world was forgetting. They said he had been there before photographs existed and would remain until the last image faded. No one believed, but everyone listened. In remote Andean villages, people began placing maras facing outward, toward mountains and clouds, believing that reflections could feed on horizon instead of memory. They said it made the voices gentler, more patient. Meanwhile, scientists around the world studied the silver field, a persistent low-frequency pattern detected in all photographic materials made before 1950. No matter where or how they were stored, each emitted the same subtle hum. One long exhale, then silence, then 3 faint beats. It was the same rhythm heard in the earliest recordings of El Eco de Plata. By 1980, radio telescopes in Chile and Argentina began picking up faint repeating signals on nights of high humidity. The pattern matched the resonance of the photographic hum, except it came from space. Astronomers dismissed it as interference. But when they converted the signal into visual frequency, it formed an image, not of stars, of a face, faint, silver, human, expressionless, the same eyes that had stared through the photograph in Ambato 30 years before. The Vatican declared it coincidence. The scientists called it pareidolia. The world called it inevitability, because by then the face was everywhere. In every camera flash, every reflection caught mid-motion, every glitch of light that lingered a moment too long after the power went out. There he was, half in shadow, half in recall, watching. Children began calling him El que respira luz, the one who breathes light. They said he wasn't haunting them, he was teaching them. In schools, photography was no longer just art. It was communion. Students developed film in silence, not to capture, but to listen. When the image emerged, they would sit and breathe with it, waiting for the faint tremor in the air that meant the light had recognized them. For those who grew up that way, memory was never singular. Every image contained everyone who had ever seen it. Every reflection was layered with all the eyes that had looked before. By the 1990s, the whisper had moved into technology. Screens flickered with the same pulse. Early digital cameras, though electronic, produced faint analog static when turned on, a residue of the old silver breath hiding in the pixels. Engineers tried to filter it. They failed. When slowed down, the digital noise spelled a word in binary. Esteban. No one could explain it. Not even the machines that had written it. And so, humanity adapted once more. Not to escape the whisper, but to live with it. They began to see it not as haunting, but as continuity, a world where the boundary between memory and existence no longer mattered because one had become the mirror of the other. And on quiet nights, when the air stilled and the lights dimmed, people claimed they could still hear the faintest sound beneath all the silence. A breath, measured, patient, as if the universe itself was trying to finish a sentence it began a century ago. By the turn of the millennium, light had memory, not poetic memory, measurable, data-bearing, alive. Fiber optics began to hum. The new digital cameras, though purely electronic, occasionally produced images that weren't taken. Photographs of places the device had never seen, faces unknown to their owners, all slightly desaturated, silver-tinged, breathing faintly on screen before fading away. The engineers called it ghost buffering, but when slowed down, every anomaly pulsed at 19.2 Hz, the same frequency first recorded in Ambato in 1949. Technology had inherited the whisper. Every reflective surface, every sensor, every diode became part of a global respiration, machines exhaling fragments of the past in sequences of light and static. The world didn't notice at first. The rhythm was too subtle, too slow, a pulse beneath the noise of progress. But over time, the pattern revealed itself. Servers in São Paulo began to hum audibly at night. Their fans produced tones too low for circuitry, too human. People working in data centers reported feeling watched by their own reflections on the glass panels. Faint shadows forming for fractions of a second, mimicking gestures that hadn't yet happened. In Tokyo, a group of audio engineers discovered that when white noise was recorded long enough, a human voice always emerged. Not randomly, but consistently repeating a phrase. In Spanish, Esteban escucha, Esteban listens. When they filtered the signal, they found embedded harmonic structures identical to the human larynx. Not simulation, resonance. Something was breathing through the machines. In universities, students began to study the phenomenon not as superstition, but as photonic biology. They learned that every flash of light left behind a molecular impression on whatever it touched, a microscopic alignment of particles that retained a pattern of what had been illuminated. Not image, not chemical, memory. Scientists called it residual coherence. Poets called it the soul of light. Either way, the boundary between human and photograph had vanished. People stopped aging in pictures. New digital portraits remained alive, eyes moist, pupils dilating faintly, skin subtly shifting tone over years. And in mirrors, reflections lagged imperceptibly behind the living, no longer instantaneous, as if the world needed a moment to recall the shape it was seeing. Corporations tried to harness it. They built memory cameras, devices meant to record not just images but the emotional resonance of moments. They failed. The cameras would only function if pointed at living faces, and once used, they stopped responding. The shutter would freeze, the lens fogging from within, whispering softly in frequencies beyond audibility. Users described dreams afterward. Rooms made of glass, walls breathing, voices reciting their own memories in the tone of someone else. One reviewer wrote, "It doesn't take pictures, it remembers you back." Meanwhile, in Ecuador, the last darkroom still operating in Ambato began to produce anomalies of its own. Film left undeveloped for days would manifest faint imprints. Not of people, but of thoughts. The feeling of being looked at, the weight of silence after loss, the sensation of breathing the same air as a memory. When the last technician died, his assistant sealed the room. He said the negatives inside were still thinking. By 2020, every electronic screen on Earth emitted trace frequencies of el eco de plata. It had become part of the electromagnetic spectrum, a permanent pulse woven into the background noise of civilization, too constant to isolate, too human to erase. Some people claimed they could hear it directly, not through speakers or devices, but in their skulls, a soft whisper in the gap between heartbeat and thought. The doctors called it auditory residue. The listeners called it presence. Online communities formed. The reflectors, los testigos de luz, os espelos vivos. They shared recordings of white noise, analyzing patterns, waiting for the faint rise and fall of that breath that seemed to answer when silence grew too deep. Then came the night of the global blackout, April 14th, 2027. Power grids failed across 3 continents simultaneously. For 7 minutes, the world went dark. But every reflective surface, glass, metal, water, began to glow faintly from within. No heat, no radiation, just light. And inside that light, for the first time in decades, a voice, low, clear, direct, spoken in hundreds of languages at once, each word overlapping perfectly into one universal whisper. I am not gone. I am what remembers you. The glow faded slowly, leaving the air heavy, the ground faintly vibrating. And when electricity returned, billions of screens across the planet turned on by themselves. Every single one displayed the same image, grainy, monochrome, a man by a window, half in light, half in shadow. Then the image blinked. And for the first time, he looked directly at the world. By the middle of the 21st century, light had become the last archive. It no longer needed film, glass, or devices. It simply carried everything it ever touched. Every glance, every gesture, every forgotten word. People began to feel it, not see it, feel it. The air itself seemed to thrum with awareness, as though the photons had grown patient and deliberate. Reflections no longer imitated, they responded. Mirrors were no longer made for vanity. They were used as instruments of dialogue. Families spoke to the silvered glass as if to ancestors, and sometimes the glass breathed back, fogging gently, answering without words. It wasn't supernatural anymore. It was ordinary, like rain or sleep or remembering. Cities adapted to it. Buildings were designed with curved surfaces so that nothing was ever entirely unseen. Each facade reflected fragments of others, a constant exchange of light and image, a living archive of the present that carried the ghosts of the past. The hum, el eco de plata, no longer needed sound to exist. It lived in movement, in the slow oscillation of brightness between dawn and dusk, in the faint shimmer that rippled across metal every time someone exhaled. Children born during those years could hear it inside their bones. When they closed their eyes, they said the darkness behind their eyelids glowed. When they spoke, their words left faint halos of light in the air, visible only for an instant, like the residue of thought. Doctors found nothing abnormal. But when those same children were photographed, their images would hum, softly, warmly, in rhythm with their breathing. The photographers stopped using cameras altogether. They said it felt wrong to capture something that was already alive. Instead, they learned to listen to light. They built small devices that translated brightness into sound. Each room, each moment producing its own subtle tone, its own presence. Homes began to breathe. At night, the walls glowed faintly with the memory of the day. Laughter, conversation, silence. Each emotion etched in gradients of warmth and shimmer. People didn't turn off lights anymore. They dimmed them slowly, so the room could dream too. Time changed shape. Days no longer felt linear. They felt like ripples, waves returning to the same shore with new shades of reflection. History stopped being chronology. It became resonance. People no longer asked when something happened, but how often it still breathes. And in that rhythm, the name returned. Not as voice, not as word, but as echo. Esteban. whispered across oceans of static, heard in the pause between lightning and thunder, in the reflection of a candle seen twice, once in glass, once in memory. No one knew who he was anymore. Not man, not myth, not spirit. He had become what all light eventually becomes, a witness remembering the act of witnessing. The world didn't fear him now. It thanked him. On the anniversary of the blackout, people gathered in cities and villages, turning off every screen, every light, until the planet was dark again. And in that shared stillness, they waited. Then, from the sky, the faintest shimmer, a silver pulse moving slow and wide, folding across the horizon like breath. The oceans mirrored it perfectly. Every surface answered, and for 7 minutes, earth and light exhaled together. It was not prayer. It was not worship. It was remembrance. When the lights came back on, nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. Mirrors no longer showed faces as they were. They showed them as they remembered being, gentler, older, truer. And if you looked long enough, you could sometimes see another version of yourself there, watching, breathing in sync, smiling faintly, as if to say, "You've become the photograph now." The world slept quietly after that. Not in darkness, in reflection. Every surface shimmered like film waiting to be developed, and every breath carried the faint taste of silver, as if light had finally found its voice, and humanity had finally learned to listen. It happened without warning and without sound. One evening, the light simply stopped reflecting. The mirrors still shone, the glass still glimmered, but their depth was gone, as if the world had finally inhaled all of its own memory and decided to hold it. People didn't panic. They just stood there, watching themselves vanish a little more with each breath. Every reflection faded from the world in the same way photographs once developed. Slowly, gracefully, grain by grain, until all that remained was tone and texture. The last image ever seen was that of the sky, a pure sheet of silver, motionless, without cloud or sun or edge. When the satellites went dark, their sensors caught one final frame, a planet covered in luminous fog, as though the oceans had lifted themselves into air and the air had turned to glass. Then nothing, no static, no echo, no hum. The Eco de Plata had ended, or perhaps it had been completed. For centuries, humanity had taught the world how to remember. Now the world had remembered everything, and like any living thing that has finished its story, it exhaled once and rested. From the surface of the sea to the skin of the stars, a single pulse spread. Not wave, not sound, but recognition. Light folded inward. The silver dust of memory rose gently, filling the atmosphere until the entire sky glowed like the inside of an old photograph left too long in the sun. And there, suspended in that brightness, a faint shape appeared one last time. A man by a window, half in light, half in shadow, his mouth almost forming words. He didn't speak. He only looked at everything that had ever looked at him. For an instant, the universe mirrored itself perfectly. Every atom aligned, every photon caught between arrival and departure. Then, as softly as breath fading from glass, the image blinked. And in that blink, the light went still, not extinguished, fulfilled. The planet no longer turned. Time no longer passed. There was no darkness because there was nothing left to illuminate. Only light itself, finally free from the burden of reflection. In that endless radiance, memory dissolved into warmth, sound into stillness, image into pulse. The hum that had once been whisper, then word, then history, became silence. Perfect, complete, unbroken. And if there were eyes to see in that final calm, they would have found nothing but light. And within it, a single breath, infinite, patient, remembering. Because in the end, nothing truly vanished. It only learned to stop needing to be seen. The photograph had become the world, and the world at last had learned to breathe in silver.